Hi, this is Alyssa Vargas.
And Claire Barrera.
Today we are presenting on queer theory.
It's a very complex and ever-changing theory, but that's what's so great about it.
Queer theory is an especially unique theory within communication studies due to how heavily it is informed by historical and current events. The creation of queer theory was preceded by a century of events in LGBT history, only a handful of which are listed here. Let's go through some of the most significant events of the LGBT movement and queer theory. In 1895, Oscar Wilde was tried for gross indecency after his affair with Lord Alfred Douglas was made public. As homosexuality was a crime in England at the time, Wilde was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor in prison. He died in exile in France. In 1905, Sigmund Freud published his work, 3 Essays of the Theory of Sexuality. In it, he argued that the expression as well as the suppression of sexual activity can impact one's entire life. In 1950, the Mattachine Society, an underground national gay rights organization, was founded in Los Angeles. In 1955, Allen Ginsberg published his epic poem Howl, which epitomized the radical queer man of the Beat generation. In 1969, the Stonewall Riots occurred. Also called the Stonewall Uprising, patrons and employees of the Stonewall Inn, a gay club in Greenwich Village in New York City, protested for 6 days in reaction to the violent raiding of the club by police. The Stonewall Riots were pivotal to re-energizing LGBT activism and led to the formation of national organizations including the Human Rights Campaign. A year after the riots occurred, thousands marched on a route from Stonewall Inn to Central Park in what was dubbed Christopher Street Liberation Day, the first gay pride parade in the United States. In 1973, the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality from its list of mental disorders. In 1976, Michel Foucault published The History of Sexuality. He argued that, though the gay community was beginning to achieve freedoms, conversations of sexuality were still dominated by old, rich white men and needed to be expanded societally. The 1980s saw the AIDS epidemic take hold in the United States. Derogatorily labeled the gay disease because its victims were primarily gay men, the epidemic caused a massive shift in gay and lesbian studies from a theoretical focus to one of urgent, steadfast activism in efforts to save as many lives as possible. In 1985, GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, was formed to protest negative representation of gay and lesbian people in media and entertainment. In 1990, the organization ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, was founded and organized protests to bring attention to the AIDS crisis. Queer Nation, the first publication of its kind, reclaimed the slur queer and transformed it into a collective identity of pride. Also in 1990, Judith Butler published Gender Trouble, which deconstructed masculinity and femininity and argued that gender is a performance that individuals should be able to freely navigate without constraint. The same year, Eve Sedgwick published The Epistemology of the Closet, which maintained that queer theory not only challenges the homosexual and heterosexual divide, but also all ways of thinking. In 1991, Teresa de Lauretis organized the first academic conference around queer theory. In 2011, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, a 2003 policy that barred openly gay, lesbian, and bisexual people from serving in the military, was repealed. In 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage. Recently in 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that gay and trans workers are protected from employment discrimination under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Let's examine the etymology of the word queer, as the word itself has held a very strong connotation throughout history. The Oxford English Dictionary provides the following definition of queer: strange, odd, peculiar, eccentric in appearance or character. Also of questionable character, suspicious, dubious. The word queer is thought to come from the Old Germanic word quer, meaning cross, oblique, squint, perverse, wrong-headed. As our textbook explains, historically, the term queer has carried a variety of meanings. It has meant something strange or unusual, something quirky. It has referred to negative characteristics, such as madness, that lie outside social norms. Most important for our purposes here, it has been a term of derision to refer to gays and lesbians. Reclaimed from its intensely negative origins in the late 1980s, the word queer is now proudly used as an umbrella term for people who are not heterosexual and/or not cisgender. The concept of identity is tantamount to queer theory. As queer identities have and continue to face discrimination, those within the queer community continuously choose whether to disclose or conceal their sexuality depending on the people and/or contexts they encounter on a daily basis. In the study, The Invisible Work of Closeting, a qualitative study about strategies used by lesbian and gay persons to conceal their sexual orientation, by Christy Malterud and Mari Bjorkman, the researchers interviewed LGBT subjects on their closeting practices and determined that the subjects' stories challenge a dichotomous notion that people are either in the closet, concealing their sexual orientation, or out in the open, having once and forever disclosed their preferences. Our analysis has revealed that people with a lesbian or gay orientation have a broad repertoire of strategies to go in and out of the closet, appearing as actions rather than being. The concepts being open and being in the closet seem inaccurate, and the verbs disclose and conceal may preferably be used to articulate these contextual and situational performances. In the study, Revealing and Concealing Difference, a critical approach to disclosure and an intersectional theory of closeting, researchers James McDonald, Kate Lockwood Harris, and Jessica Ramirez perfectly state how queer theory works to allow more people to open about their identity, writing, "Difference is related to power, because some forms of difference, such as monogamous heterosexuality, are privileged and normalized, whereas others, such as same-sex desire, remain stigmatized and non-normative. Queer theory explicitly celebrates these non-normative and stigmatized differences by challenging the processes through which certain differences become normalized and privileged." Teresa de Lauretis is credited for organizing the first academic conference centered around queer theory. Her essay, Queer Theory, Lesbian and Gay Sexualities, which served as the introduction for the 1990 issue of the journal Differences, introduces queer theory as a unifying framework encompassing both lesbian and gay studies and allowing insights to be shared amongst both groups. De Lauretis also envisioned the greater inclusion of work from non-heterosexual persons of color under the pioneering field of queer studies, and hoped for a greater sense of community among scholars studying non-normative sexual identities. She writes, "The term queer theory was arrived at in the effort to avoid all of the fine distinctions in our discursive protocols, not to adhere to any of the given terms, not to assume their ideological liabilities, but instead to transgress and transcend them, or at least to problematize them."
It's important to note that queer theory rests on gender theory and gender studies. A key concept in queer theory is that it rejects fixed gender categories and argues that sexual orientations and identities are fluid, complex performances rather than essential, stable aspects of identity. The Littlejohn text asserts another one of the key concepts in queer theory is that queer theory challenges heteronormativity, the institutions, structures, and practices that privilege heterosexuality. Heteronormativity is a worldview that promotes opposite-sex gendered relationships as normal and preferred, which is reinforced through institutional arrangements and social norms. Basically, women should only date men and men should only date women. laws, societal norms, and representation have a history of upholding this belief. Adrienne Rich published an essay in 1980 titled Compulsory Heterosexuality and Lesbian Existence. She suggests that heterosexuality is a political institution aimed at advancing male status in society. Basically, her argument is that women have been conditioned by society to yearn for men's approval, leading women, even queer women, to have a preference for relationships with men. This leads women to devalue the importance of their relationships with other women. For example, there's a similar experience amongst many bisexual women, which is that we've had crushes on our childhood female friends, but we never realized it because they were girls, whereas it's quite obvious when girls have crushes on boys. This idea became so crucial to the bisexual and lesbian community that a Tumblr user at cyberlesbian made the now famous Lesbian Master Doc, which is a 31-page document designed to help women determine their sexuality by showing the differences between comp het and attraction. It's a great example of the internet fostering education and communication within the queer community. It argues that women are taught from a very early age that making men happy is our job. And when you're trained from childhood to see romantic/sexual relationships with men and only men as major life goals, how do you separate that from what you want? Compulsory heterosexuality is the voice in my head that says I must really be het, even when I'm in love with a woman. It's important to note that queer theory rests on gender theory and gender studies. A key concept in queer theory is that it rejects fixed gender categories and argues that sexual orientations and identities are fluid, complex performances rather than essential, stable aspects of identity. One of the key figures in gender studies and queer theory is American philosopher and gender theorist Judith Butler, who is a lesbian woman. Butler views gender as a performance of repeated acts rather than an innate identity. Queer, then, can be thought of as an act, a verb, rather than just a noun. The book calls it a set of actions and performances, rather than a stable identity characteristic.
It's one thing to say that gender is performed, and that's a little different from saying gender is performative. When we say gender is performed, we usually mean that we've taken on a role. We're acting in some way, and that our acting or our role playing is crucial to the gender that we are and the gender that we present to the world. To say that gender is performative is a little different, because for something to be performative means that it produces a series of effects. We act and walk and speak and talk in ways that consolidate an impression of being a man or being a woman.
Drag is a really important topic in queer theory. In a critical introduction to queer theory, Nikki Sullivan explains, for Butler, drag subverts the expressive model of gender and the notion of a true gender identity, because in imitating gender, drag implicitly reveals the imitative structure of gender itself, as well as its contingency. With this in mind, I want to go back to the textbook's reference of Stephanie Young. Young explains that queer theory is about interrogating discourses of the deviant, the perverse, the stigmatized, the taboo, the grotesque, the non-normative, the sexual other. These two ideas of drag and the grotesque are incredibly exemplified by the Boulet brothers' reality competition show, Dragula. In this competition, each episode has a theme and two challenges. First, the competitors dress in horrific drag in a runway performance. Then they participate in extermination challenges, similar to Fear Factor. For example, they're buried in coffins, they have to eat bugs and intestines, etc.
Our monsters.
Hi, my name is Astrid. I am 24 years old. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. I'm a musician first, drag queen second. My drag mother is the infamous and sexual Dolly. I'm not trying to be this, living up to Dolly thing. That is so far outside of my goals on this competition. What Dolly does is amazing, and what I do is amazing, but they're two very different things. Somebody should watch Dragula because it really opens your mind up to all the infinite possibilities of what drag can be, right? We have every gender represented, we have every style of drag represented, and it's done in the most, I think, authentic way, which is truthfully punk.
In the introduction to Queer Words, Queer Images, Communication and the Construction of Homosexuality, Ringer identifies 4 goals of his anthology. To provide research findings for those interested in viewing homosexuality from a communicative perspective, to identify how research into gay and lesbian behavior informs communication theory in general, to provide a research agenda for queer studies in the future, and to explore the issues raised by the human response to homosexuality. Ringer, alongside a host of contributors, achieved these goals by examining how gays and lesbians are represented in books, on television, in politics, in athletics, and in their personal and private lives.
Queer theory and communication, from disciplining queers to queering the disciplines, started as a special issue of the Journal of Homosexuality and became a book in 2003. The theorist stated, "We felt and still feel that much of the scholarly work on sexuality, either consciously or unconsciously, participates in, contributes to, and affirms the normalization of hegemonic heterosexuality as invisible, natural, given, and taken for granted." The article proposed 2 major shifts in contemporary queer theory. The first is a rejection of a minoritizing view of queer in favor of a universalizing one. The minoritizing view suggests that the homo/heterosexual definition is an issue of enormous importance for only a small, relatively fixed homosexual minority, while the universalizing view maintains that it is an issue of tremendous importance in the lives of individuals across the spectrum of sexualities. The second shift is the approach to sexual identities as multiple, unstable, and fluid social constructions intersecting with race, class, and gender, among others, as opposed to singular, stable, and essentialized social positions. This discussion of intersectionality brings us back to the Littlejohn text. Queer theory argues that sexuality cannot be disconnected from other identity categories. Instead, it shapes and is shaped by numerous social and cultural factors. Here are a few clips that exemplify the reality that all queer people experience queerness differently, and that the community has a long way to go when it comes to acceptance, visibility, and representation.
Let me see you. Make it wiggle down. Let that shit.
Damn, you fine as hell. Hey yo, think I can get you? Oh my god, bro. Oh hell no, man.
You know, I've never felt comfortable in a girl's body.
So removing your breasts and changing yourself into a man is going to solve all your problems?
I know that won't happen. But people will start to see me for who I am.
You know, it just saddens me to see so many of our strong butch girls giving up their womanhood to be a man. You know, we're losing our warriors, our greatest women. And I don't want to lose you.
I'm not following some trend.
Why can't you be the butchest butch in the world and keep your body?
Because I want to feel whole. I want the outside of me to match the inside of me.
You'll be giving up the most precious thing in the world.
What, my tits?
No, being a woman.
In Queering Public Address, Sexualities in American Discourse, Charles Morris III and other queer theory scholars hope to recover muted queer voices by examining speeches delivered by Abraham Lincoln, Eleanor Roosevelt, Harvey Milk, Marlon Riggs, and Lorraine Hansberry. On queer impoverishment in the media, Morris writes, "Scholars of the history of sexuality have to contend with the problems of silences. Silences created by historians' refusal to acknowledge the sexualities of the individuals they study, and silences created by authors of the documents historians use to reconstruct the past. In public address, such silences echo throughout the archives, anthologies, syllabi, reviews, journals, bibliographies, and footnotes that fail to speak. These silences need to be amplified in grating volume." In her article, Pushing Boundaries, Queer Intercultural Communication, Chavez connects queer studies and intercultural communication by identifying the following shared areas of discussion: nationalism, imperialism, international conflict, identity politics, transnational public spheres, militarism and militarization, biopolitics and necropolitics, globalization, social media and representation, and dialogue. On the relationship between queer theory and intercultural communication, Chavez writes, "Queer and trans theories have been the rigorous critique of immigration policy, the prison industrial complex, and the militarization of everyday life."
Another really important moment in queer theory was a forum in the Journal of Applied Communication Research called Queering Communication Studies. It was written by Jimmy Manning, who invited 8 academics who taught queer theory to participate in a discussion about the discipline and examine the possibilities for incorporating queer perspectives into communication studies. A common idea held by many of the scholars is that queer theory is about possibilities. It's about disrupting norms and opening our minds up to changing ideas, politics, education, identity. Queerness and queer theory are ever-changing. They're in constant flux. They're fluid. A lot of theorists mentioned that queer theory is activist-oriented, it's radical, and that we must continue to use that as a catalyst for societal and political change. Trans scholar Benny Lamaster pointed out something really important about intersectionality within the queer community and the queer theory discipline, stating that some communication research lazily collapses intercultural differences among queer and trans subjects, such that one is to assume all lesbian, all gay, all bisexual, and all trans subjects experience and navigate the same oppression and the same. Lamaster goes on to say that my gender is intersectional, my gender is felt embodied. They point out a flaw in queer and gender theory. Trans scholars and activists have long critiqued scholars' privileging of performativity over embodiment, a critical element that distinguishes trans scholarship and activism from queer scholarship and activism. Lamaster goes on to say that my gender is intersectional, my gender is felt embodied. They point out a flaw in queer and gender theory. Trans scholars and activists have long critiqued scholars' privileging of performativity over embodiment, a critical element that distinguishes trans scholarship and activism from queer scholarship and activism. This calls for a discussion on intersexuality. An intersex person is a person born with reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't fit the boxes of female or male. 1 to 2 out of 100 people in America are intersex. How can we assign binary gender roles to people when some people don't even fit into a sexual binary? A few scholars pointed out that the communication discipline has a long way to go when it comes to queer interpersonal and small group communication. Justin J. Rednick proposes communication research could better identify how queerness affects how we relate with others. What do queer relationships look like? How does queerness affect or intervene in connections with friends, family, and romantic partners? How do organizations structure climates that promote queer inclusivity? How do queer bodies experience health? Okay, intersectionality was a common thing amongst the theorists. In the end, they came up with an action plan, which included applying aspects of queer theory to all of their courses, using gender-neutral terms and asking students their pronouns, decentering Western gender and relational formations, prioritizing diverse representations, but not calling them diverse, calling them wholly articulate representations. Make sure that the staff and faculty are wholly articulate, and create a safe space for queer people to thrive.
In his article, The Normalization of Queer Theory, David Halperin discloses harsh criticism of queer theory. Though he's glad that the theory has opened up opportunities for scholarship on trans identities, he feels that queer theory portrays all previous work in lesbian and gay studies as under-theorized and increasingly backward, identitarian, and outdated. He argues that queer theory has been granted a rapid acceptance and respectability in the academic community that lesbian and gay studies were never afforded, and that the theory itself is so diffuse that it has lost its radicalism. He writes, "Queer is such a simple, unassuming little word. Whoever could have guessed that we would come to saddle it with so much pretentious baggage, so many grandiose theories, political agendas, philosophical projects, apocalyptic meanings. A word that was once routinely applied to lesbians and gay men as a term of abuse now intimates possibilities so complex and rarefied that entire volumes are devoted to spelling them out. Even to define queer, we now think, is to limit its potential." In his article, We Are Here, The Politics of Memory in Narrating China's Queer Feminist History, Hongwei Bao examines what he perceives as the overshadowing of queer movements in China by the Fourth United Nations World Conference on Women. His analysis of China's disregarded queer histories provides a framework to look at the ways that Western feminist and queer movements have muted the advance of queer thought and feminism in the non-Western world. He writes, "Through linking Chinese queer activism to a major international conference for women, We Are Here demonstrates that it is impossible to separate sexuality from gender, queer rights from women's rights, and China from the rest of the world. Some feminist ideas, e.g. liberal feminism, travel easier and faster than others across national borders. In this process, while liberal feminism is celebrated, Marxist and socialist feminism is forgotten or erased from both historiography and public memories."
Gay language and slang are a huge part of gay culture and communication. All the way back in 1927, A.J. Rosanovs explained the clannishness of homosexuals has led to the development of special slang expressions among them. Today, some more common words in the queer community include queen, slay, beat, chapstick lesbian, U-hauling, flamers, work, and so many more. It's important to note that a lot of gay slang comes from Black women and Black queer people. Now I want to talk about physical communication in the gay community. Physical appearance and wardrobe are huge parts of gay culture. Gay people love using clothing, hairstyles, tattoos, piercings, jewelry, etc. to express their queerness. Anna Marie Vanska talks about Roland Barthes' essay, Dandyism and Fashion, saying that Barthes invented queer theory since he had no alternative. Being gay meant to be closeted, and belonging to a group meant to be able to read those invisible signs. For example, a bracelet with bisexual flag colors, or a handkerchief code, which symbolizes different gay sex interests. Vanska also mentions political clothing, such as the AIDS awareness t-shirt, Safe Sex is Hot Sex. She wrote, "Queer emerged as opposition to identity, and clothing played an important role in fighting homophobia."
The term queer theory was arrived at in the effort to avoid all of the fine distinctions in our discursive protocols, not to adhere to any of the given terms, not to assume their ideological liabilities, but instead to transgress and transcend them, or at least to problematize them.
Clark and Turner studied a small group of British queer youth to consider whether they felt under pressure to conform to lesbian, gay appearance norms and use their clothing and appearance to actively construct and manage a visual identity as lesbian, gay, and bisexual. The study found that there were distinct lesbian and gay appearance norms. These norms center on a butch or androgynous look for women and a valorization of youth, muscles, masculinity, and a variety of gay styles for men. Clark and Turner studied a small group of British queer youth to consider whether they felt under pressure to conform to lesbian gay appearance norms and use their clothing and appearance to actively construct and manage a visual identity as lesbian, gay, and bisexual. The study found that there were distinct lesbian and gay appearance norms. These norms center on a butch or androgynous look for women and a valorization of youth, muscles, masculinity, and a variety of gay styles for men. For example, some visual signifiers for queer women are septum piercings, flannels, vests, beanies, boots, and lesbian haircuts.
Hey, excuse me. Yeah? Oh, I just wanted to say I really like your style. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fucking gay. Are you gay? Yes, bitch.
Here are some images of myself and my queer female friends. We have platform Doc Martens, tattoos, vests, muscle tank tops, sports bras, bandanas, rainbow bras, collared short sleeve shirts, light makeup, and short haircuts. And here are some pictures of my gay male friends. They're mixing ideas of masculinity by showing their muscles, tattoos, facial hair, and Western utilitarian style with femininity and homosexuality. Tiny sunglasses, bright colors, short shorts, rainbow jewelry. There's this tricky relationship with gay fashion and identity. On the one hand, we can use our wardrobe to signal our queerness to other queers, therefore making it easier to find each other and to make friends and form a sense of community and belonging through visibility. At the same time, this freedom to express ourselves can be stifled, as a lot of us feel pressure to conform to these standards in order to fit in. The participants in Turner and Clark's study discussed how queer people who don't conform to queer aesthetics can be made to feel like outsiders in queer spaces. One of the participants in the study, a 22-year-old lesbian named Martha, said, "You see girls walk in and they've got a nice girly top on, long hair and makeup, and the dykey lesbians in the corner gasp, 'What's she doing here?'"
I don't look queer, and if I don't look queer, then I don't feel queer. If I don't look queer, then I'm not queer.
Still, queer visual style can form a sense of community. As Brewer said in The Social Self, what is painful at the individual level becomes a source of pride at the group level, a badge of distinction rather than a mark of shame. We can also relate this back to reclaiming gay slurs, such as queer.
If you're queer or into fashion, hear me out. Have you noticed that queer people usually have a good sense of style? Like, what's up with that? I just feel like we're more open to challenge societal norms. Because we don't fit into those boxes anyway. Okay. I don't know, guys. How you feel about this one?
Media representation of queer people is a huge topic in the communication discipline. Queer representation started out as downright offensive, derogatory portrayals, and then moved to token, stereotypical representations such as Stanford and Sex and the City. Now we have a lot more nuanced, multifaceted, authentic representations of queer identity and relationships, such as in Euphoria, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, etc. A lot of queer theory has been written on But I'm a Cheerleader and Light. We're gaining traction. In 2019, GLAAD found that 18.6% of films from the major studios that year contained queer characters. However, the representations of queer people are still largely white and male. Still, a lot of work has been written about queer film studies, which aims to contribute to changing societal norms by providing visibility for diverse queer representation.
He goes, "No, you not girl, you boy." And I'm like, "Mom, boy, girl." And she goes, "No, you boy, you lucky, because boy is good and girl is bad." And I go, "Why?" And she goes, "I don't know." This is going on for like 45 minutes. Born, boy, break. You're just yelling at each other. And then eventually I get through to her a little bit and she goes, "Okay, I understand, but to me, I still see you as boy. And I go, okay, Mom, you see me as boy. I sad. I kill myself. And she goes, oh, you girl. I'm like, yes, Mom. I'm girl.